So Henrietta, Kevin Hassett, the director of the National Economic Council, was asked if he was concerned about a recession. Here's part of what he said.
I think that what's going to happen is the first quarter is going to squeak into the positive category, and then the second quarter is going to take off as everybody sees the reality of the tax cuts.
So does that ease concerns at all or just confuse things, given what the president said?
Honestly, it sounds like Kevin Hassett is confused. There are no tax cuts coming. The bill that they're writing right now extends existing rates. And that's the biggest part of this problem. This is a $5 trillion bill, $3 trillion of which at least is going to be deficit financed. And there's no stimulative effect. So when Trump goes on national television and he says he's, not willing to rule out a recession, it's a combination of two things that are a remarkable showing of his cards here, and that the tariffs are going on. They will be inflationary. They're taxes on American consumers. And the tax bill that they're writing is not, in fact, stimulative. It has no economic feedback because it's an extension of the status quo, almost fully financed by the deficit. So I think Kevin Hassett is got to stop calling it tax cuts when that's not what it is.
Important fact check there. All right, Jay, Canada is not backing down. Today, Ontario is adding a surcharge for electricity that's sent to some U.S. states. Justin Trudeau's successor, Mark Carney, just showed in his victory speech he's ready to take on President Trump over these tariffs. What more can you tell us about all that and about him?
Yeah, and let's start with that surcharge on the electricity, Chris. It's going to affect about 1.5 million families in the states of New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. Doug Ford, the premier of Ontario, levying that surcharge. He said it's going to cost families about $100 a month in added cost, and said at one point, if the president continues to push Canada, he won't hesitate to shut that electricity off altogether. Let's shift over to Mark Carney. He's the economist who's never held office, who won the leadership of the Liberal Party last night at their convention, calling his win with nearly 86% of the vote a mandate focused on President Trump, the tug of war over those tariffs, and a trade war that continues to intensify.
The Canadian government has rightly retaliated and is rightly retaliating with our own tariffs that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here in Canada. And my government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect. The Americans, they should make no mistake, in trade as in hockey, Canada will win.
Yeah, look, I have to tell you, we were at that convention last night. There was more talk about the White House, about the president, about the situation with the tariffs, and the suggestions of President Trump that Canada could become the 51st state than there were actually about a campaign or their party. So they are highly focused on this, and having been here for a bit, Chris, I can also tell you there's a strong surge of nationalism here in Canada. Protests outside the U.S. Embassy, a boycott of American goods, U.S. wine and liquor pulled from the shelves of government liquor stores. We know Canadians have a well-earned reputation of being kind, composed, and reserved. I can tell you right now, we're also learning that when they're pushed, when they feel like they have been embarrassed and they feel like they are getting bullied, they're very quick to stand up and push back.
Jay Gray, thank you for that. So, Henrietta, when your clients call you and they say, what do you think the next few weeks or months look like? What do you say to them?
It's interesting. My clients are mostly investors on Wall Street, and they're calling from various conferences saying, the tide has turned. The environment is much more sour now than it was a couple months back. And that's because markets are predictive and future looking. So the stock market tumbles that you're seeing today and that you pointed out at the top of this segment are because corporations are preparing for tariffs that have not yet gone into effect. April 2nd is the oft-discussed date for new tariffs to come on from everything from steel. 90% of Canadian steel is going to get hit. to EU automobiles and everything getting more expensive as we're dealing with sort of domestic and grocery prices continuing to be high from inflation. So investors are really calling to try to get a handle on how much of the exposure there is to tariffs, how much deficit financing there will be in this tax bill, and whether there is any good news on the horizon. And the answer is the tariffs are coming. They've been slow to roll out, and the full impact of the tariffs is not yet baked into the market. So there's more downside to come.
And Congressman, I read one article that said this shows us that President Trump and his administration have more tolerance for economic pain than we assumed. I think most people believe that if the markets started to go down, he would work to change that. Why not this time?
Well, it's kind of mystifying to me that President Trump is behaving so recklessly with respect to the stewardship of this economy. He is trying to undermine North American economic integration with these tariffs. Are they on or are they off? What we do know, if he does go through with this, he will likely cause recessions in Canada and Mexico and create higher prices here and disrupt manufacturing and agriculture. So that's going to be very negative for us. He's also at the same time bad-mouthing Europe every day, a major trading partner with us, the European Union, all those countries, huge amounts of investment flows between the United States and Europe and back and forth. And he just seems to, and he's talking about, greater rapprochement with Russia, which has an economy smaller than some of our states. So what I'm getting out of all this is that he just seems to be rather destructive and reckless and does not understand the consequences of these tariffs on American manufacturers and also on the farmers. It's just going to have it. And businesses want predictability. They want stability. They want certainty. And they're getting none of that. This is having a chilling investment, I suspect, on investment and hiring right now. And that's why there's some softening in the economy.
So let's talk, Brian, about one of the things that Charlie just mentioned, which is agriculture, because it just started today that China is imposing tariffs on many of the farm products from the United States. China is our largest overseas market for those products. What now? What's that about?
Yeah, and that's a retaliatory tariff because the United States put in a 10% tariff in the first week of February and then another 10% last week. No exemptions on China, by the way, which were provided to Mexico and Canada as of the later part of last week. But this is really big for a lot of American agricultural exports. These are heartland farmers that make things like soybeans. They, raise pork. They raise pigs. They raise cows for slaughter. That then they ship the meat off to China. Now you have a 10 to 15% tariff on those exact types of products for what is a major export market for farmers here in the United States. So they're going to feel that pinch with perhaps even a cutoff in some cases as buyers in China decide to go elsewhere to source their soybeans and pork and beef and what have you. So I think that this, though, it's really alarming because you consider that President Trump promised tariffs of up to 60% on the campaign trail. This is really just the beginning of that tariff war. So any sort of farmer that's watching this thread is going, okay, well, not only are those tariffs now in effect that are impacting my business now, but this could just be the beginning of a ratcheting up of those rates of tariff.
And we know some of his biggest support came from rural areas. So, Henrietta, what do you think has to happen for the economy and the American people to get kind of to the other side of this trade war, for the economy, for at least the messaging on the economy to be a little more predictable?
Well, I think that tariffs are sort of the true north for President Trump, and they are widely supported and were a major tenet of his campaign. So what really needs to happen, you mentioned the stock market sending a message earlier, that's not moving the needle with the White House. You really need to see Republican voters start to change their mind about these tariffs. And I'm afraid that what's going to happen is it won't occur for President Trump, but it will occur for the House and Senate members who are up for re-election next year from the president's own party, especially if they're asked to codify these tariffs into their tax bill and make them permanent. Those farm state senators that we're talking about and the congressmen who are all up for re-election next year are going to bear the brunt of the 15% retaliatory tariffs from China, the $86 billion worth of tariffs that Canada is putting on next in a couple weeks as a response to these tariffs. And the feedback is, really problematic because there is not a bailout yet in the works for farmers. We know that in the first term, we got $28 billion worth of bailouts for the U.S. farmers, more than the entire auto bailout during the Great Recession. And that's something that farmers are going to have to look forward to, but they don't have yet. And I'm afraid it's going to have readout to the members in the House and Senate, if not the president.
Congressman, the Washington Post also points out this, quote, inflation slowed in Biden's final year in office, and most economists say that Trump inherited a fairly strong and stable economy. Trump pushed Biden on the stock market, inflation, and overall economy, all issues on which he's now telling voters to look the other way. So, politically speaking, are they going to be able to hang this on President Biden? Or, as Henrietta just said, are they facing a real problem come next November?
Well, look, the longer Donald Trump serves, the harder it is going to be for him to lay all this on Biden's lap. It's going to be really difficult, particularly now that he is engaging in this trade war in North America. Look, these tariffs, they will raise prices, assuming they get implemented. He's already going to implement them on steel and aluminum. We know that prices are going to go up. That will be on Donald Trump. And I don't see any way that he can somehow avoid responsibility. And of course, like, members of Congress are going home to their districts right now. And if they're smart, they're going in talking to businesses. And I guarantee you, they're going into manufacturers in their districts right now who are telling them that these tariffs are going to raise costs for them because they import things, inputs that they need to make things here in America. And this is going to be bad for manufacturing. So these members are going to hear it. Republican members are going to be the ones who are going to have to push back. When I served in Congress, most Republican members did support opening markets and lowering tariffs. This is a complete flip-flop for many members of the Republican side who have never embraced this type of AFL-CIO protectionism that the Democrats and, of course, Donald Trump are best known for.